AI and film. Should AI films be allowed at film festivals? A judge's verdict. A filmmaker submitted a fully AI-generated film to a 48-hour competition this year. The audience applauded. I have spent 10 years on selection committees. I have screened thousands of submissions. That applause made me deeply uncomfortable. Not because AI is new, not because the technology surprised me, because the applause was for the wrong thing in the wrong room. Today, I am going to explain exactly why. I am going to take you inside the selection process, and I am going to give you the standard I believe each and every film festival must enforce before this debate gets any further ahead of us. The phenomenon. This is not a hypothetical argument. Runway AI launched a dedicated film festival. The winning entries screened at IMAX theaters. They were promoted across major platforms. The production value was striking. At the same time, at the Brennan Film Festival, a filmmaker submitted a fully AI-generated entry to a 48-hour competition. The community response was immediate. Filmmakers called it a violation of the spirit of the competition. The phrase I saw repeated in forums and comment threads. This is completely contrary to what these events are for. They are not wrong. But here is what is missing from this debate. Almost every voice weighing in is doing so from the outside, from the position of a filmmaker who has submitted work, attended screenings, followed the conversation online. I am going to give you a different perspective. I am going to give you the view from inside the selection committee. Because the answer to this question is not about opinion. It's not about technology. It's about what competitions are actually designed to test and whether AI-generated films can be evaluated by the same criteria as everything else. They cannot, and I am going to show you exactly why. What judges actually evaluate? When I sit down to screen a submission, I am evaluating three things: story, craft, and intentionality. Story is the most familiar. Does this film communicate a clear meaning? Does the narrative hold together without text explaining what the audience should feel? If a filmmaker needs a title card to tell me what the film is about, the film has already failed its first test. Craft is the second layer. Every technical decision in a film is a signal. Framing, sound design, editing, rhythm, performance, color. I do not evaluate these in isolation. I evaluate them together as evidence of control. Is the filmmaker in control of their medium? Every choice either confirms that or undermines it. The third element, intentionality, is the most important, and it is one of the most relevant to this discussion. Intentionality is my ability as a judge to distinguish between a deliberate creative choice and a mistake, or in the case of AI-generated work, between a creative decision and a system limitation. When I watch a submission and I see a frame that appears stylized, I need to know whether that was chosen or whether it simply happened. When I see an edit that feels unusual, I need to know whether it serves the story or reflects the constraints of the technology. Craft is not about budget. Craft is about control. When I cannot access the decision-making process, when I cannot tell what was chosen versus what was generated, I cannot evaluate the filmmaker. I can only evaluate the output. The distinction is the entire argument. The case for AI films. Before I give you my verdict, I want to be honest about the counter-argument, because this debate has a history. Every major technological shift in filmmaking has been called cheating at some point. Digital cameras were not considered real filmmaking by purists. Non-linear editing changed the craft of the edit. The traditionalists resisted it. CGI was viewed by suspicion by cinematographers who had spent decades building practical effects. The gatekeeping argument is not new, and it has been wrong before. There is a genuine case to be made for AI as filmmaking tool. There are visual styles achievable through AI generation that would be physically impossible or financially impossible for an independent filmmaker. Certain animated aesthetics, certain surreal visual environments, work that uses AI as deliberate choice, not a shortcut. The strongest argument from the AI side is this: the vision is still human. The prompt is a creative decision. The selection of outputs is a curatorial process. The editing, the sound design, the structure, these can all remain entirely in the filmmaker's hands. That argument has merit. In certain contexts, it holds. I'm not here to argue that AI has no place in filmmaking. That argument is already lost, and it should be. Tools evolve, I get it. Filmmaking evolves without them. I'm here to argue something more specific, that current integration of AI-generated films into traditional competition structures creates a problem that no amount of technological progress will resolve on its own, because the problem is not the technology. The problem is the framework, and the framework is broken. If you are a filmmaker navigating the submission process right now, this channel covers exactly these questions from the inside. Subscribe. I publish regularly on festival strategy, short film craft, and production. Now back to the verdict. Where AI films fail in the judge's chair. In my experience, reviewing AI-generated submissions, there are 3 specific failure points. I'm going to name each one directly. The first is what I call the grammar problem. AI-generated submissions frequently contain errors the filmmaker did not catch. Spelling errors in title cards, grammar mistakes in text, incorrect syntax in subtitles. These are immediate disqualifiers, not because I am being pedantic, but because they signal something important. When a filmmaker writes a sentence by hand, they read it again, they show it to someone else. The process of writing forces attention. When AI generated that same sentence, the filmmaker often does not read it with the same screen. They accepted the output. They moved on. And the result is a film that contains errors the filmmaker would never have made if they had been in direct control of every word on screen. These errors reach the judge's eyes. They cannot be unseen. The second failure point is the intentionality problem. When I review an AI-generated submission, there is a question that follows me through every scene. Is this deliberate? Is this the limit of the technology? Is this composition a choice? Is this color palette intentional? Is this motion a stylistic decision? Or it's the best the system could produce? In 10 years of screening submissions, I have never asked that question about a human-made film. Even when the craft is poor, even when a choice is clearly wrong, I can identify the intention. I can see what the filmmaker was attempting and evaluate whether they executed. When AI generated visuals, that evaluation becomes impossible. You cannot recover a first impression. The moment a judge becomes uncertain about what is deliberate in a submission, the film is compromised. Everything that follows is viewed through doubt. The third failure point, and the most visible, is the performance problem. AI-generated human characters remain the single most damaging element in any submission. The movement is constrained. The expressions are limited. The timing of gesture and expression, which real human performance produces instinctively, is absent or approximate. This is not a stylistic issue. It is not something that can be defended as an aesthetic choice. The uncanny valley is a real perceptual response. The moment a human figure moves incorrectly on screen, the viewer is pulled out of the story. The judge is pulled out of the screening. Real human performance, even from a non-actor with no training, communicates something that current AI cannot replicate. Presence, instinct, the small, uncontrolled moments that make a scene feel true. When that is absent, the film loses its ability to create the primary emotional experience cinema is built on. The standard festivals should set. So, what's the answer? I want to be precise. I'm not calling for a blanket ban on AI-generated films at festivals. I am calling 3 specific things, and these 3 specific things are achievable immediately, without waiting for technology to evolve, without waiting for industry consensus. The first is mandatory disclosure. Every submission that uses AI generation for any element of the film must disclose it in the submission package. Not in a buried technical note field, not in a buried technical notes field. And the primary submission information visible to every member of the selection committee before screening begins. Hiding AI use in a competition is equivalent to misrepresenting your crew, your location, your production context. It's a form of misrepresentation. It should be treated as disqualifying condition. This is not punitive. This is transparency. It gives the selection committee the information it needs to apply the correct evaluation framework. The second is separate categories. AI-generated films belong in their own competition category, evaluated against each other by criteria designed for that medium. Integrating them into traditional competitions is not inclusion. It's a category error. A CGI short submitted to a live-action category would not be evaluated fairly, not because it's lesser work, but because it's a different medium requiring different criteria. The same logic applies here. AI-generated work should be celebrated on its own terms by judges equipped to evaluate those terms, not inserted into frameworks built for a different set of craft decisions. The third is what I call the spirit test. Every competition has a stated purpose. Read the submission guidelines for any 48-hour film competition. The purpose is to test rapid human creative problem solving under constraints. This brief is designed for human teams to see how filmmakers think, communicate, collaborate, and execute under pressure. An AI-generated entry does not fulfill that test, regardless of quality, regardless of how sophisticated the prompting process was. The competition is not designed to evaluate the output. It is designed to evaluate the process. The Bremen audience applauded what they saw on the screen. I understand that response. The output may have been technically impressive, but the applause was directed at the wrong thing. The spirit of a 48-hour competition is a human resourcefulness under pressure. That is what the event exists to surface. That is what deserved to be in that screening room. Let me bring this together. AI-generated films can be serious creative work. The vision can be human. The intention can be genuine. The output can be striking. None of that is in dispute. What is in dispute is the framework. The current integration of AI-generated films into traditional competition structures creates unanswerable questions for judges. Questions about intentionality, questions about craft, questions about whether the filmmaker is being evaluated at all or whether the technology is. The answer is not a ban. The answer is clarity. Mandatory disclosure, separate categories, enforcement of the competition spirit. These are not restrictions or creativity. They are the conditions that make fair evaluation possible. They are the conditions that protect the integrity of the competition that filmmakers spend months preparing for and submitting to. Film festivals exist to identify human creative vision and bring it to the world. That mission does not end with AI, but it does require that we are honest about what we are judging. The technology will evolve. The performance problem will narrow. The intentionality problem will become harder to detect. That is exactly why the standard has to go first. If you are submitting to festivals this year, I have covered the 5 things that get a submission rejected in the first 10 seconds. That video is here. If you have a position on AI in competitions from the filmmaker's side, from the festival side, or anywhere else, I want to read it in the comments.